So we're here at ng-conf and we've got Wahlin, Jeremy Likness.
I'm a little like
grumpy old man.
Yeah. I didn't realize I was supposed to be you. Can we? God!
Poor Gal and John Papa. We've all come from a .NET/Silverlight background. They're all here at ng-conf. Guys, why are you here?
Because it was fun.
This isn't a Microsoft conference. This is an Angular conference. What brings you here?
No, I mean, ng-conf, it's the first ever Angular conference, and we were all excited to be asked to be part of this in any way. And yeah, it's great to get so many people together. I think they sold out in less than an hour.
Yeah.
So
it was like
seconds,
a rock concert almost.
Initially.
Yeah. It was crazy.
It's
crazy.
nuts.
Yeah, and we've all been using Angular for the last year, and partly it's been really great. I mean, we love the .NET community, don't get me wrong, but it's been really great to meet people who are from outside of that community and see what they're doing and see if they have the same take on it that we do.
Yeah, I think definitely from my perspective, we started using Angular in a project to meet a specific need, and we do Microsoft on the back end, but Angular on the front end. And we were just watching this thing gain momentum and take off and grow. And so when they announced that there was going to be a conference, we said, look, it works. It's improved our whole process. There's hype out there for it. We've got to be a part of this and get in at the ground floor.
Yeah, and I'd agree with you. I use Angular not for every app because I think I was talking to John or somebody about this at breakfast. Yeah, it was John and another guy.
It was a long time ago.
yeah. Trying to remember when it was. It was this morning. I don't think it's appropriate for every app, but I do use it a lot and still use like Web API in the back end or potentially Node.js. And the conference for me was exciting because number one, I'm a big fan of. We're in Salt Lake City right now, and I used to work up here, whole different life ago. And if you like to ski and stuff, which sadly I'm not staying to ski this time, it's an awesome place. So a lot of fun.
So something you said I think is interesting that we can talk about because I'd like to hear everybody's perspective except for him.
You know what? Grumpy guy. I mean, you know what? He's ready for a snooze. I think.
All right. Yeah.
We'll put him down.
We thank you. Well, we brought up the whole topic of when's it appropriate, when's it not, and people ask all the time. Not just Angular, but when is this whole JavaScript-based web app the right choice versus when is it maybe not the right choice? And we had a chat this morning at breakfast. Yeah. If you want to start with that?
Yeah, so I'm working on a project right now. It's kind of one that specifically my company will use, but it has some products and things in it. And in Angular, I think it's awesome. If you're doing, for instance, a lot of CRUD operations, you need it to look and feel like a desktop. You have a lot of data binding going, but it's really, really good in those areas. But for me, I needed more kind of SEO out of the box, search engine optimization. And I didn't want to deal with, you can do it with Angular, but a lot of the search bots out there, they won't actually take the time to make the AJAX request, as you guys know. So for that project, which I kind of wanted to get more into Node as well, because as anyone that knows me knows, I'm a huge MVC fan and Web API. But I've been doing a lot of Node lately as well, just to kind of be in both worlds. So that one's a Node app. I'm not actually using Angular in that one, just because I didn't want to deal with the SEO stuff.
So are you saying that there's no one technology that fits every bill all the time?
Of course there is. You should always use a SPA.
Build it once, this way it'll run everywhere and solve every problem.
But we laugh at that, but we get asked a lot is, just tell me what I should use. Well, what's your app? Well,
sure.
Forget what my app is. Tell me which technology I should use.
Well, you deal with that probably every day in your job.
Yes, yes we do.
Because you guys build all kinds of apps. And you guys too.
Yeah, well, I think one of the big things that interests me with Angular is a lot of people approach frameworks and tool sets with, what does the technology do? Does it have data binding? But we do a lot of projects that are a lot of large teams. So we come in and consult, and then at some stage we have to turn this over, and the customer has to take it over. And their approach is to scale across teams of sometimes 50 developers.
That's a lot.
And so we don't just look at the tools and what the tools do, but we look at how do they facilitate the development team. In other words, does it make it easier for multiple developers to be in the same app doing different things? And that's what we found with Angular, is that it's so prescriptive in the way, it's not an opinionated framework in a sense, but the way that you plug the components together sort of forces you to take a modular approach that makes it easy for larger teams to scale. And we started with a team that was just using straight JavaScript. And then we moved to Angular and TypeScript in both of those, and we saw phenomenal acceleration. And we're able to scale that team out just because of the way it facilitates that modularity.
Now,
Yeah,
I'm guessing
except-
you can have one team working on this piece of the module and another on
Right,
this one.
exactly. And
suck
even it's not even feature based, but even areas of the stack, right? We can have a UI person working on a directive
Yep.
and cleaning up that directive. I just consume it as a service. I declare it in my markup, and it gives us that nice separation of design and development that we liked in Silverlight, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that pit of success thing. But I mean, mentioning Silverlight, that's really important. Now, there's lots of .NET folks out there, and many of them are steeped in other parts of the .NET technology. But all of us are Silverlight guys originally who made the transition. And for us, it's actually been a pretty smooth thing, because when you program in the Angular way, if you will, at least my experience has been that I'm bringing along all the same architectural patterns that I was familiar with, and the whole way in which I think about how do I divvy up my code, how am I going to manage my code, what do I expect should be, this should be a view model, that should be a model, that should be a view, and all that stuff plays so nicely when you're playing with Angular that it just felt like yes, I have to learn JavaScript, but my transition to this way of thinking was very natural. So I think that's one reason we all have gravitated to it, although what I'm finding also is all the MVC people who have, from my mind, a bigger jump to make, a bigger hurdle to make when you start talking about client-side execution, but they're also finding it a pretty easy transition.
Yeah, because that's a big important part. What I find a lot of these struggles of people trying to get into Angular, Spa, Backbone, Durandal, whatever it might be, is they come from a server-based world, but I call it server page rendering.
Yeah.
Whether it's PHP or JSP or it's Spring or it's .NET, wherever you come from, when you're generating web pages, I hear people all the time saying, my presentation layer is the server. That's my presentation layer. Now we're saying the first hurdle I hear a lot is, well, now you're putting your business logic in the client.
Yeah.
Right.
Time out.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Presentation logic goes in the client. You're just moving it up. Business logic still stays on the server.
Yeah.
But they struggle with that. Well, like in ASP.NET, use Razor and MVC to get things to render and do what you need in model binding. Now they struggle with, well, do I have to give that up to do this with Angular because I'm doing that over here? How do those two worlds merge? And there's that, anytime we have a experience in a certain area, I find there's like that emotional attachment when you have to give up something that you enjoy and
Sure.
you're good at.
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, I recently had down in California this week somebody come up and they were still really upset about Silverlight. Kind of expecting that I was going to fix it, I think.
I love those conversations.
And I finally, the conversation ended by, I said, honestly, you just need to get over it. And you can either be bitter and stick with that, or you can move on. And I think I'll give John a lot of credit for me moving on, because you did.
You were
jumped
bitter.
on.
You were bitter, Dan. I saw
No,
that
you
bitterness.
jumped on Knockout really early.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Sure.
you remember, John and I did a talk in Germany. I don't know.
Do you remember how adversarial that crowd was when we walked in that room?
It was
They were
because
going
it
to
was a
kill me.
Silverlight crowd.
Yeah, they were ready to string me
And
up.
were you still at Microsoft then?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
and John and I did this knockout talk, and John actually put most of it together, and I just got to blab with him on it. But you jumped on pretty quick to that, because and I don't think you even knew what was happening at that, or well, I think it was after the announcement, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Of what
I
happened with
cannot
Silverlight.
speak to anything whatsoever.
Yeah. John, tell us, what do you know?
Exactly.
2 years later.
But anyway, my point of that was getting into, I think data binding was the first missing piece in the web.
Yeah.
And then, Knockout kind of did a really good job in that area. And now Angular's that framework around all the, data binding, testing, services, modular, all
Right.
that fun stuff.
Injection, moving from screen to screen, even within the frame of the
So,
single
even
page.
animations.
But that was the
Yeah.
great thing, and that presentation was awesome, because we did an hour presentation. Half it was jQuery, but then we tricked
Yeah.
them into doing a half hour of Knockout.
Yeah.
And it was a microcosm of what's really happening today, because that crowd was very XAML-centric.
They were.
And they loved XAML, and they got into there. And once we started talking Knockout, originally they were literally angry. We didn't want to talk about it. But by the end of the half hour, they're like, wait a minute, I can do declarative data binding in the web? That's one of the biggest reasons I love XAML.
Right.
Oh, I can design controls and change them any way I want. And
Yep.
at the end of it, they were happy. So I think the XAML crowd is an easier transition.
I do too.
Yeah, I do too, because once you map it out, I mean, you can look at, we had value converters, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have filters, we have control templates, so we have directives with transclusion. And I mean, there's so many maps, but that's, at the end of the day, people were so emotional about Silverlight. And I would say, why are you so emotional? What is it about Silverlight you love? And it was the language and the constructs of the language, and it was data binding.
And think of the
Pure and
original
simple.
version.
And
Silverlight.
productivity, there was a real, I mean, there was such a great
Yes.
tool set
Right,
wrapped
well,
around
that
that. And that's
facilitated all that.
only just beginning to come over here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's
Tooling's
so-
not great
tooling's
yet.
not
So
there.
let's be honest. You can still, if
Yeah.
you can, if you can be in a situation in which you can deliver a Silverlight app, you can still do that faster.
Sure.
What was the
Today,
original
not tomorrow,
vision of
but today.
Silverlight? If you remember the original
Yeah.
vision, cross-platform,
Everything.
Yep.
cross-browser apps,
Right.
which started dwindling even before then with the whole, it doesn't work this way in Mac, it doesn't work this way
Yep.
in Chrome.
Yeah.
Now, with SPA, we have that.
Yeah.
You can work on Dan's phone that's this big, or you can work on my laptop, or
That's right.
You know, whatever
John
else
makes
we
fun
have.
of my Note 3 because he
Right.
says it's a weapon.
It's the
It
size of
actually
my
is.
head.
John frightens me because he does a lot of workout stuff. And so it's
Yeah, careful where you wave that thing. It's pretty massive.
But it's nice how we've come this far.
Well, and it just felt really natural. So I think for the Silverlight guy, that's the hurdle is I'm going to put one technology aside and pick up another one and have to learn some new things, but it's technology and some tooling, stuff like that. You can get it, but you're not really changing the way you think about the problem.
Right.
For the person who's used to building web apps where you're serving everything, now you have a very different
I
mental
think it's a
transition.
bigger
there.
transition.
Sure.
It is,
Absolutely.
and so we should probably help those people because I do get that all the time. What do you mean I'm putting all of my logic down there? Well, that's because all of your logic was together on the application server. Now you're making a hard distinction between that part of your code on the server that had UI responsibilities, that had application workflow responsibilities, versus the true business logic that needs to stay on the server.
Yeah.
And so
No, that's not a bad change
it's
either.
it's a
No,
great
it's
thing.
not.
Separation's
It
never
should have
a bad
been there
thing.
anyway, right?
And I mean, when we look at our apps, it's not like we start with the idea we're going to use Silverlight or Angular. It's, what's the problem? What's your
That's
team
right.
look like?
What are you trying to solve?
And in this large app that, I can't reveal too many details about, but we're on a very massive Angular application, and it moves so much data. And we could have made the decision to scale out with tens of thousands of users hammering the server.
Yeah.
And the server has to figure out, hey, for each of these 10,000 users, not only am I going to grab the data,
that's a good
but I'm going to
example.
figure out how to draw it up and paint the canvas.
And what's your
And then I'm going to
application state?
ship all of that, not just the data, but the transform data and HTML markup and everything else. No way. And so when we take this approach, we're just sending little packets of data, just the thing
Right.
that changes
Whatever
for
you
each
need.
user, and letting their workstation do the work of transforming it, doing the markup, and everything that they need. So now we've got an instant distributed server, basically.
Exactly.
All these nodes that are distributing the workload for us and cutting down on network traffic.
And I think that the network traffic thing is very intuitive. The comebacker for that is, well, the networks are getting faster and faster, so that's really
Which is
not a
true.
problem. So let's move to the other plus, which is one of the things that's really hard to do when you're driving everything from the server is to maintain the user's current application state. To
Right.
have a really stateful client. And the thing we loved about Silverlight is they were stateful clients. We
That
could
was easy.
preserve
Sure.
we could preserve invalid data. We could hold it. The data can be invalid here on the client. It doesn't have to be on the server. And what widgets you were on, what page you were on, how it looked. We can do that. There's a lot of client state. We can do that now over here, and that is so hard to do if you're trying to drive
In a
everything for the server.
server-based model where you're maintaining state, I've seen several apps. Literally hundreds of apps where they build the app and it all works great. Then they deploy it to production and it breaks because they're maintaining state in the server. Why? Web farm.
Right.
Oh wait, you're on Wi-Fi
Yeah.
over here. You're on a cell phone over there. Different
Exactly.
IP address.
Yeah.
Sure.
So those things you don't have to deal with that.
Sessions break.
And that's you made such a great point, because I actually saw a discussion on a forum where someone was complaining about MVC because they said, but it's missing session state. I have to build my own session state.
Yep.
And the web is a stateless playground. And what I like about the tool sets that are coming out is they use the web as it was intended and force developers to think about state differently. So it's intentional. It's not a web form type project doing all this behind the scenes and really shoving a lot of state information in there that you don't need, because you can keep that state right there in
On the client.
browser.
Right on the client.
So I've got three
And your
big
server's
questions.
and your server's stateless again, and it can be really nimble and fast.
Right.
And so it's not just about bandwidth; it's about really keeping a stateless server, and it can stay stateless because it doesn't have to preserve the user experience. The job of creating a great user experience belongs on the client.
And that really scales everything nicely.
So I get the negative side, so the devil's advocate, which I like to play a lot when I'm trying
Sure.
to evaluate technology. I'll give you some of the questions I get. And one of those is, all right, so I'm building this app and you're putting all the, let's just say logic on the client. Presentation logic, we'll just admit to. And it's JavaScript. So that can't work out well. It's not compiled, it's not fast, it's a browser. How is this going to work? I mean, how do you deal with having a ton of JavaScript in the client? Why would SPA work for me?
Well, and that is a challenge. And I'll admit, in Angular, that's actually a challenge I would offer. You can do it. But that's why we have, at least I'll let you guys chime in. You get the biggest app, I think. It sounds like from what I've heard.
Yeah, it's pretty
But,
large.
Did I say that right? It's the biggest app. Anyway, because I built, I don't know, quite a while ago, and did a post on dynamically loading, because you can't, even if you minify, like your whole app, I'm sure it's probably megabytes of JavaScript if it's...
There's a lot there, but you'd be surprised that with bundling and minification how small.
How
it
small
is.
you can get it
as
down.
well.
Yeah.
In GZIP, yeah.
So I think it depends on how big it is minified, and if it's reasonable, then you're right, the bandwidth is pretty good.
Didn't we go through this also with Silverlight though? We had the
Yeah.
same problem,
Yeah, the Zap
and as a
files.
matter of fact, the Zap files were many, many, many times larger than what
Way
we're seeing
bigger.
now.
It's
Right.
true.
And so we got into in many Silverlight apps, they had to have dynamically loaded modules as you went there. Well, you have those same strategies available to you here in
That's right.
single page
Things
apps.
like require.js will help with the loading
That's
part of it.
Yep.
But what about the speed in the browser? I mean, can a browser run JavaScript fast?
It's
Yeah,
awesome.
I mean, and that was the biggest, when I went into it, I looked at two things really. One was the speed of JavaScript, right? Can it really get to the speed we need?
Yeah.
And the second thing was it being a dynamically typed language. Nothing wrong with that, but when you're dealing with a large team and this whole concept of discovery and strong
Gets
typing
scary.
and interfaces, it gets scary. So those were the two things, and those problems are being solved. JavaScript runs so incredibly fast. They have
Yes.
unreal ray traced live with colored lighting, shader engines in the browser
Have you,
running
real
off
quick, have you guys
JavaScript.
seen the latest? Have you ever heard of BabylonJS?
Yes.
That's the guy. Have you
The
seen the
3D
latest
stuff.
train demo?
Mm-hmm.
So if you guys haven't seen it, is it babylonjs.org, I think?
I think
Anyone
so,
know?
yeah.
Anyway,
Sounds about
search
right.
BabylonJS.
It's from the guy who used to do 3D for Silverlight.
It is.
So,
It is.
yeah.
Right.
And they put together this framework, and there's a bunch. I mean, you got 3 and all these others, but they put together this. If you want to see how fast it can be, it's this 3D Studio Max, I think it was, export of a train going around this like little mini world, and it runs right in the browser,
Sure.
and you can see the frames per second. It's awesome. It's using WebGL, but
Yeah, so the speed is definitely being addressed, and all the companies are behind that. Microsoft, Google, whoever, the Firefox browser, every single release is focused on optimizing performance and making
Yeah.
that engine run faster.
And there's things you can obviously make smart choices on too once you're in the browser. But the funny thing is the things we don't talk about anymore. So 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I was at Microsoft. One of the big things they talked about a lot was we have to get our browser faster because, Chrome and them were fast, and they kept on working on optimizations. We don't hear those things anymore from any of the browser companies like we used to because the speed, Chrome,
So
every
good.
version was getting faster and faster.
Yeah.
They've kind of hit that.
Everybody's plateaued.
Right.
On a quad-core processor phone is faster than my laptop was 3 years ago.
Exactly.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
so I would like
So-
to point out that beast is a quad core. Just so you know.
Okay, so Jeremy had the other objection that you ran into, and it's very serious, is that as we switch to a language like JavaScript, it becomes increasingly hard to know what's going on just by looking at the code, and the tooling is not there, so IntelliSense, and I don't know about you guys, but my number one mistake is not really knowing what the parameters are, the right orders when I'm passing something in and getting the wrong type in or something like
Sure.
that. And so for that, you guys have addressed it with...
With TypeScript.
Exactly.
And we looked at TypeScript very early on. It seemed like a logical combination with Angular. And what was interesting was it was in beta, and we talked about it, it's in beta, but with TypeScript that's different between that and other languages like CoffeeScript that compile, is a superset of
That's
JavaScript.
right. That's the
so
big,
low
big
barrier of
killer
entry.
feature. Yeah.
Plus, we did a proof of concept and saw that the JavaScript it generated, and we had purists on the team who are like, no, don't change my JavaScript. But then they saw the JavaScript that was generated and they said, wow, it really follows the patterns and conventions we need, but it makes it easy and intuitive, right? So we started moving over to using that platform, and what we figured out was if we ever decided that it was a failure, that TypeScript wasn't going to work, we just snip it, we've got the JavaScript, we just move forward. So it was really easy, good exit strategy, right? So we went forward with it, and the combination of switching to Angular and TypeScript accelerated the project at least 4 times, meaning the time it would take to come up with an idea and then actually release an iteration of software, I would say about a 4-time improvement.
So we just did a project. In fact, Ward was involved a little bit with a particular company, and due to how contracts work, I can't say the name, but they make chips for your computers. But anyway, they
So Frito-Lay?
Frito-Lay.
Okay.
Frito-Lay. If you didn't know, they're getting into business. Multiple types of chips. So anyway, they're using TypeScript very heavily as well for the same thing. And the way I look at that, and I'm not saying that for those listening, that TypeScript's the only way to go, because I love JavaScript, and I think everybody here is fine with it. But when it comes to the big stuff, and these guys had they're not even that big of a team, to be honest. I think it was 5-6 people. But even if it goes bad, you always have the JavaScript.
Right.
And when ECMAScript 6 comes out...
That's what I wanted to point out.
Oh,
exactly.
sorry.
No, just go for it. I'm
Stealing
so glad
his
to hear
thunder.
it. Because, no, that's cool. That's exactly right. Because you're not writing in anything. The CoffeeScript, you're writing in a different language because you like that style.
Yeah, Dart, CoffeeScript, different things.
Different things.
Different.
This is JavaScript, not as it is today, but as it will be very, very soon.
Other than types.
Right.
But even that stuff is threatening to filter through. I mean, we saw some of the possible. Well, maybe that's ECMAScript 7. We're already working way ahead.
Yeah.
We're looking at that.
I'll be retired.
But I mean, you were talking about just parameters and knowing order. Just pulling in a type definition file, we get a new person on the team, and they want to create a new Angular controller. It's no longer, because I call it kind of IntelliSenseless. Yeah. The IntelliSense that's built in. If you don't have the comments, when you do a dot on a JavaScript object, you get the whole universe of possibilities, right? And that's senseless, where with TypeScript, it's boom, this is what it's expecting, here's the type, and
here's the casing. How much do we spend today without it? Going, typing it in, run it, learn that we got the casing wrong. We knew the right method, but we got the casing wrong. Is it a capital I, a little I? It's like, I waste a lot. It's very fast, but I waste a lot of time doing that.
Well, part of that's tooling, which will grow. But I'll give you 3 things I have against TypeScript, and I love it too. Dan and I have a course on it at Pluralsight. Nice plug. So
check it out.
Well, so I like TypeScript, and I've worked on some large projects. Probably not as big as yours there, but the things that we struggled with was we didn't find going through the project was any faster than when we did projects with JavaScript. We found it at the same speed. And the reason for it was the type definition files, in some cases for third-party libraries, were evolving and still evolving so fast, we constantly felt like it was battling ourselves to figure out which type definition to pull in, like jQuery and Knockout and Angular, and getting them in the right spot. The JavaScript that it emitted, we had to make sure, as a second point, that while it emitted valid JavaScript, patterns that some of the developers were using were making a problem. So let's say I had a namespace in .NET where it was namespace a.b.c.d.e. whatever.
Right.
And that's very common in the .NET and even the Java-based worlds. Yep. You bring it over to TypeScript, and now you have a function that's 8 levels nested.
Sure.
Which looks
and
like
it
a mess.
encourages people to use classes, which they shouldn't even be using in statically typed languages, but they're so easy that people do deep nested hierarchies in statically typed languages. You don't want to do that in JavaScript, but it's going to encourage people to do that kind of thing, and so we're going to have to untrain some things.
Right. And the third piece of that was the amount of code I wrote in TypeScript in a project, and this is a team of 6 people, was like this on a page, and the JavaScript emitted was like this a lot. So things I could do in JavaScript in like 5 lines of code, I was taking 3 times as much in some cases, because things that never get generated, like interfaces and whatnot.
Well, you don't have a constructor. I mean, you do, you fake it.
Right.
But you don't have to write up those lines of code.
So my point there was it wasn't a bad, that we saw the value in that project in the sustainment side of it.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
In the testing and sustainment.
Yep.
Right. Well, I mean, it's important to look at all the different sides too, and it gets too easy to say, oh, well, they talked about and they had success, so we need it for our project. But there's so many dynamics.
There's no panacea
that go
to
into
anything.
Exactly.
Wait,
Well, there
so
actually
you're
is.
saying there's not one?
There is a panacea.
He's about to reveal it.
I'm about
please
to
tell
reveal
us,
it.
Ward.
All right, because one of the things when you get over here is you get this Angular thing, right? And it's it's all about you get the MV. Well, look, let's admit it. It's MVVM.
Right.
For-
Yeah, they call it MVC,
You
but
can call it
yeah.
whatever you want. It's MVVM.
MV star, blah blah.
All right, so you're working on it. It's got the great stuff on the glass, and you're working your way back, and you get to the view, and then you get to the model, and now what do you do? Angular doesn't, it gives you what, you're going to make raw Ajax calls. So
I think I know where this
do you
is
think where
going.
this is going here? Well, you remember in Silverlight.
Ajax.
It's like, what do I?
So rest Angular.
That was a fascinating
I mean,
talk
if there
too.
was only something though,
If
just
there was
make that a
only
breeze.
something.
Only something.
Like a-
breeze.
There was a breeze to use, yeah. And for you Silverlight fans out there, if you remember RIA services, not that much better, but it's but
Much better.
but it
Which is
addressing that challenge of working with interconnected objects, rich object models on the client, and not having to write all the plumbing that's necessary to show their validation, hook up the different parts so that you can navigate through them, figure out how to
Dirty
save,
tracking.
dirty tracking, what happens when I want to save orders and their order details, is there a REST endpoint for that, what am I going to do? These are concerns that there's this thing called Breeze, which I'm kind of associated with, but it's sitting right there, and it works with your Angular.
You bring up a great point because we talk about, and Dan and I are victims of this himself. I'll throw you under the bus like myself in this.
Thank you.
We often say with Angular, one of the great things is it does everything for you, but it doesn't.
No,
it's
it
true.
doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
What
do
it
that
does
stuff.
very well is it makes itself it does a lot. It does 80% of the plumbing for you, and it's modular enough where if you don't like something or you want to plug things in, like Breeze or like UI controls from Kendo or from Bootstrap, or
You can do that.
you can pull
Right.
other things in and use it with it, and it loves it.
In fact, I was
great.
interested yesterday when they did their keynote at ng-conf here. It sounded like it started out having sort
Yes,
of
yeah.
almost like Meteor.
Yes,
Yeah.
they originally wanted to do
And-
Meteor, yeah.
And then they pulled the whole back end out. And,
Which is how Ember feels a little bit to me, but not so much. I think the closest comparison I've seen is I've worked with some guys who do a lot of Sencha and Dojo. And you're in those worlds, and you're not just doing what Angular does, but you're doing everything.
Yeah.
So when you step outside of that world and people start saying things like jQuery UI or Bootstrap, they're like, wait, why would I touch those? Because what I like about Angular is I'm still doing JavaScript.
Yeah.
Right.
Still doing TypeScript.
I think
Well-
of Angular as just the framework.
Yeah.
And it doesn't force me down one road or the other. I mean, yeah, you got to use controllers and you got to use scope.
Yeah.
And other than that,
But I mean, it's a fabric, right?
Yeah.
That you lay your app against.
Exactly.
And we had already committed to Kendo UI controls, so we had JavaScript and Kendo. And one of the things is we were very much pushing the limits of customization for the Kendo controls. We had some crazy grid objects and other things. And what was nice was when we moved to Angular, this was before Kendo actually built their adapters and
Yeah,
directives.
they have now.
So we wrote our own, but it was very straightforward. And we were able to wrap it, and I was able to take something that if I was just wiring it up directly and jQuery turned into a grid and set this config and this, it would be this much code. And now it's just a tag I drop in and a couple attributes that I set, and that wires up my
You're
grid,
done.
and I'm good to go.
And I'll bet you could do a hybrid approach now where you could use a UI suite for some of the general stuff, and then you would have your really super duper special components, and you could write
Oh,
them that
absolutely.
way. And it would
Yeah.
all look like the same stuff.
I think it's a place people fail quite a bit on project is they say something like, and I love Kendo, so and I use it too, but when I use those things, I think the places people fail are, I want to use it for the grid. So they start using it for the grid. And that's a great place to go because there is no real grid control
Right.
built in. Then they start going down the road of, well, I might as well use it for the button
Right.
and the text box.
And they're not reevaluating each widget and saying, what is the
Do we
best way
really
to do
need
this
it?
widget?
Did you need a widget for a text box? And you end up going full bore into these
because it had
things.
Right.
rounded corners.
I know.
And,
Yeah.
in part, that was because with the way that a lot of these control suites work, there was you had to buy into their one way of doing it. But now with the Angular bindings, the way in which you as a programmer interact with the controls is very uniform. So you really can afford to mix and match.
And Kendo was wonderful. I mean, Burke Holland
Yeah.
said it today in his talk. He alluded to it. Wasn't main focus of it from Telerik. Is that when people buy their product and they had like 50 widgets, they pull them in. You can just pull in one, and just use
Right.
it. And that's phenomenally different than what we
Keeps
used to
script
get.
size small.
Well, when we looked at Angular, I get a lot of people whose opinion is that, oh, you go Angular, you have to go SPA, right? And everything has to be SPA. And we said, well, we didn't even want this. This application is so enormous that if we went with just SPA across the board, we would be dropping a half gig of JavaScript code for the whole app. And so what we did was we modularized it, and we have certain areas that are SPA-like within those areas, but then we have completely different areas. And tying back to the whole point with Kendo UI where you can pull pieces of that, was the users navigating through the app, they can get delivered just parts of modules based
What
on
they need.
exactly what
Right.
they need, and we don't have to bring down this whole universe of the app every time. And it gives us that flexibility that we wrote our own utilities and services and JavaScript components before we had Angular.
Yeah.
And so these were just standalone JavaScript objects that did things.
Yeah.
And we can just easily pull those in. And when I say Angular's like that fabric for the app, I can register it in dependency injection, and when I need it, I can pull it out. But if you looked at just the definition of that component by itself, it's just JavaScript.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
Tell me, where, you know, one of the things that's always bugged me is this monolithic app thing, and we've had them in every technology that I've been in. You know, you have the 100-page Silverlight app, and you have the 100-page MVC app. But don't you see this as our trending away from that and having more an idea of a confederation of workflow modules? And are you guys working towards that idea as you think about how to decompose this gigantic app into
Right.
things?
Well, I mean, so the mindset, for example, for this app is there's certain types of applications you can get into that get you into a very sequential mindset, right? So I've got state, I've got steps, I've got ABC, and there are business processes that look like that. But really, the way we approach this is we're looking at things you do. So think of it as like verbs, right? So I'm going to do this and this, and we expose all these endpoints through our service layers that are just these tiny little things that you can do here and there. And then we weave that together in the client with the application framework. So we're not dealing with state in the sense of I have to remember I did this and this. It stitches together. And to your point, I can take this service here and this service here and aggregate it into a functional page, and it gives me flexibility that I didn't have before, because we know that once the user gets the app in front of them, they change their mind. Oh, well, what if the username was up here? What if I could have this module? I need to see these two things side by side. And when you don't build an app that says I have to go orders and then customers, but you build an app that says here's some things I can do with orders, here's some things I can do with customers,
Yeah.
it's really easy
Let them
to
drive.
bring those two together if that's what they need on that app. So that's what we're seeing. And when the customer, we're looking at this forward thinking too, as Angular is a client of the application. It's not the application. So if I want to build a native iPhone app, Windows 8 app, whatever,
Still
to
good.
provide a richer experience, I can do that with the endpoints that I've stood up, because I'm not tying my business logic. And that's, you know, you said people are so scared that the business logic's going to the client. We're not doing that.
Shouldn't do that, yeah.
So
Right.
I think it's the key is you can build a back end with services and whatnot. And what's one thing that's really opened up with Angular is it's because of the way it's built and the way SPA's built. You can build your client with Angular, and then all of a sudden you're like, you know what, I can use it with Java in the back end, or I can use it with PHP, or I can use it with...
wait, what did he say?
You know?
Did he say Java?
Or you can
Something
use
like that.
or you can
Script. I think you meant to say script on the end.
Yeah, Node.js. So we can.
Yeah, I mean, your whole back end really opens up, which means that now that dichotomy we used to have before in those adversarial conversations with
Yeah, you had
.NET
to do
versus
this
Java
or
versus
this or
PHP,
this.
they go away.
Yeah.
Totally.
Doesn't matter what you're building, now we can build this front end that everybody can use. And now what comes in the conversation, which you were kind of alluding to, is the user experience. You know, the way you actually interact with the application starts to make more sense for the user. So you don't have to build this screen with 100 tabs with 100 fields in each
Yeah.
tab.
I think I always promote nowadays. I call it the data server because I think you said it earlier when we started. You said when you got Ruby and Node and MVC or whatever. What do you call it? The presentation layer was all in the server. And yeah, what you just said, everything's switched now. Where I don't care, it's a data server. Yeah, it does serve up maybe some HTML and JavaScript, but really it's just about your endpoints.
Yeah, and for rich apps, you think about these large companies out there, and I don't work for any of these ones, so I'll just mention like Fidelity or Magellan or any of those big companies out there. They have their data already set up. You know, they've got their data. They've got their back-end services. They're not writing from scratch in a greenfield environment. So if they want to build a client on it, they just want to be able to tap in toward their services. You know, this is what this is ideal for. Let me surface this so my boss on his iPad can use it. So the guy on his desk on a Windows 7 PC can use it. And go anywhere.
That's certainly the approach we took with Breeze. I mean, if you think back to RIA Services, which was pretty locked into the whole EF chain and
Right.
WCF and SOAP and all that,
Yeah.
and we set out to make sure that that wasn't the case. We wanted to play well with a particular .NET stack. We wanted to play well with a Rails stack. We wanted to play well with a Node stack. But the really key piece is having a clean separation of what happens in the client from what happens on the
Right.
back end.
And that's what Angular helps promote.
Certainly
Because
does.
it just keeps things clean if you do it right.
Yep.
And that's what's been really helpful for us at Winelec, because our approach, we did a lot of Silverlight apps because we do a lot of business apps, and they made sense for line of business. But we've always been adamant, and people will say, well, why are you going through all this exercise of separation? It's just so much faster and easier. Just generate everything from the database. And we were very insistent
Well, to get it
that
out
you
there,
have
sure.
to have a separation, right? And now we actually look at this, we call it Silverlight modernization, right? So you can't stay on Silverlight, you're moving to something else. Well, if we architected it this way, there's really still 80% of the app that's usable moving forward. It's that 20% of the UI logic that we're moving over to use Angular or whatever it might be. And it just makes a longer lifetime, I think, for those apps, and it gives them a lot more flexibility.
Well, and the thing is, for the MVC folks, I've in fact at UC Berkeley Tuesday, I had a guy come up and say, "So do I throw all my MVC skills out?" And first off, no, because you can still use, it's not MVC, but Web API, or you could use MVC for JSON. But the other thing is the blended approach, where instead of serving up just a static HTML template, what if MVC actually serves up the template based on like security constraints, or extra caching, or
that's exactly how
Or
parts
you
of
can
our
use
app
your
are.
layout in your view for with MVC to put up the shell with the
Yeah,
authentication.
MVC
Partial.
becomes a way to stand up templates that are secured, and Web API becomes a way to stand up
And data.
endpoints and data interactions.
Plus, you know, if you have an existing investments in a big MVC app, you're not going to be able to make a transition to any other technology all in one gulp. So one of the really nice things about this is you can identify in the current flow of your MVC app which part of that would be particularly well served by having the spa, have a richer user interaction. And so from the outside, it can be very seamless. You're sort of moving along in MVC, and you come to this spot here, and it goes whoop, and it's a spa, and nobody knows. And then you come back up, and you move to this other module.
Exactly.
And so you can introduce, you don't have to do spa all at once. You can drop it in here, here,
There's nothing
here.
wrong with hitting a link that loads a whole new page.
Exactly.
So, I had
No, I
three
mean,
apps
there's not.
recently that fall into that exact scenario. One was with web forms, one was with ASP.NET MVC, and the third one was with PHP. All three apps had already been written, and they were making modifications because apps always get enhancements. And they were like, I like, you need to look at Angular for this thing. They're like, I don't want to rewrite the whole app. Like, you don't have to.
Right.
For that particular piece of that screen, look at using this to do that. Because what they were going down this road of, and they actually wrote a prototype with it, was like 2,000 lines of jQuery to manipulate the screen and move things around. I'm like, this could be done in about 100 lines of Angular. And
Right. And that's, you know, it's interesting because of the way Angular's wired in. I don't think people realize you can have an app and just a div that you literally just
Yep.
what do we
drop
call
it
them?
in.
Silverlight? Islands of richness?
Yeah,
Silverlight,
exactly.
and we did the same thing.
The little islands, but you can literally just drop it in and say, I'm going to improve this piece,
right?
right? And keep my existing
And slowly
structure.
migrate if you want to, and if not, you can keep it that way.
And we had a customer who had a very big Silverlight app. Same problem. You have the big MVC app. They got the big Silverlight app. How are we going to make this transition? They used They kept their Silverlight thing as a shell, and then when they got to a specific piece of functionality, they seamlessly swapped in a web browser
Interface,
control that you can't see the Chrome on, and now you are SPA for that little bit. And so now they can migrate piece by piece. They don't have to turn the organization inside out. They can do it. They can learn how to write a SPA without and contribute to the whole application without having to put everything at risk. Because no business is going to put everything
The
at risk.
moral of the story is baby steps are best.
Yeah.
Anybody biting off big chunks, I'm just like,
I do highly
that's not
recommend
me.
that your first app is not a large 100,000.
Oh,
Right.
well,
Exactly.
I mean, even for us, the power of the POC, right?
Yes.
So, and what's so interesting for us as a case study for the app is we were 6 months into it with a team of 9 developers using just JavaScript Knockout, the Kendo stack. And we had an opportunity to take a look at, you know, how we were approaching the UI. We were stepping on each other's toes because of JavaScript and dynamic languages and casing and everything else. So we just did a POC. And I actually resisted it. I said, you know, this is brand new. It's not tested. You know, this is a huge app. We really need to. And one of our other developers was really adamant about, you know, he had been looking into it and he felt it would facilitate the types of things we needed. So he built a POC and he took a whole section of the app and completely rebuilt it in Angular, standing it on top of the existing services.
Yeah.
And we were all just blown away, but it was a baby step. And it didn't have to be this thing where suddenly we went into a black box for 2 months and came out
Yeah.
with an Angular app.
Exactly.
We were able to
well,
slowly.
and then at the end of the 2 months, you're like, oh crap, it didn't work.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
we were
yes.
able to slowly move forward with it, and the team just gained momentum, and we found out the
cool.
areas that were angularized, if you will, were actually better quality, less defects. People were building them more quickly, and so we just slowly transitioned that to the entire app.
So here's another objection I hear is like you can't test that stuff. You can't, all right, and because there it really in the day there was no testing of JavaScript
Right.
stuff, and people are really concerned about code quality, and a lot of people believe that at least some amount of testing is part of what makes code quality work.
Right.
Now, I think that the testing story has improved dramatically, and I'm finding as we're beginning to develop our chops in testing Angular apps. What are you guys doing on your project about that?
I would argue our testing is actually better than a lot of other testing because a lot of people don't test, right? And they don't have a strategy. But we did that as well. We moved over to heavier testing because we were having some quality issues and we wanted to preempt that. So we had our regular like unit tests and integration tests at the web service level and everything else. But when we looked at Angular, we have a person on the team, Josh Carroll, who just has a really solid testing background. So he sort of spearheaded this effort. But we basically decided to pull in Jasmine, which is an open source unit testing framework, plays really well with Angular. We pulled in Phantom.js, which is a headless browser that lets you run the tests. And within no time, we had an entire framework that let us test our different controllers and modules. And what I loved about it is that you can have, for example, a coded UI test that's at the UI layer.
Mm-hmm.
Those things are so fragile, right? People just cringe because the instant you move a button or change an ID, you mess it up. Whereas with this, we test right underneath that layer. That's the data binding layer, just like we did in the Silverlight days.
Test
testing
those view models.
the view model instead. And it's been very successful. People think now it's not pulling the trigger like you would with a test project in some of the older, like a Silverlight had a unit test framework and boom, you pulled the trigger. We had to do some work to integrate it, but we actually have automated builds that will kick off and run through this suite of tests from the Angular layer. And we have a combination of unit tests because you can easily mock the service calls, you don't have to stand it up. But we also have end-to-end tests that validate that the whole stack is working and that, if I create a new customer, it creates it, it returns it, we get a new ID and all the things that are important for the app. So that's what we're using is Jasmine, Phantom.js, but the extensibility of MS Build. But I'm even talking Microsoft terms. There's so many open source and other community build projects that cater so much to these testing frameworks and just integrate them right into the workflow as well.
Well, shameless plug here. Guess who's going to be working on that Pluralsight course on testing apps?
Yeah.
I'll put you on the spot here, John.
It should be pretty good. So we've gone down this road quite a bit, and the thing we've struggled with, and I'm not a big fan of testing, it's just my personal bane in my life, but I've gone down this road quite a bit to figure out why is it so hard? Why is it so difficult to get going? So recent experience I went through on this was I was almost at like line 100 in my test spec before I got to the point where I was actually writing tests because the setup of getting the test ready, the modules, and everything else in place. So I said, let's go through this exercise, and Ward and I have done this together recently, of figuring out what is so hard about getting ready for tests using Jasmine and Sign-On and Karma and things and Phantom.js. And once you pull all those things in, first it's concept count. How do you get past what these things do? And second, we found all these things that we were reusing. We found a way to basically prep our specs.
Yeah, the test setup is usually what kills you, but we figured out that there's a pattern to that too.
Yeah, and we were able to basically just call a function off, say, go set up my tests, come back.
Right.
Now I'm writing tests.
And that's exactly, it's awesome to hear that because that's what Josh did with our framework. He set this up so that you literally just file new and you're ready to start writing tests.
That's nice.
And what's interesting is I went into this a fan of testing to help automate regression and coverage and everything else, but I was not a test-driven development fan.
I'm a test during development fan.
But into that at all.
Yeah.
And Josh kind of not just came in and said we need tests, but he explained some rationale and he was talking to me about how tests can change the way you think about code and change your API, right? So you can write this and have all this, and then it's tough to test, or you can write the test first and have something that's easy to test. And so I started practicing that, and I have to admit I came out of this project where it's not all the time. I mean, let's face it, there's chunks of code where you
Yeah.
sit down and you write the code.
That's
I don't
right.
care.
Especially if
But
you're spiking.
there is a lot of code where I start with given this, then that, and I haven't even written
The
my
type of
object
code
yet.
yet, yeah.
And then I go back and write it, and I'll tell you what, it completely transformed the way I write JavaScript
Yep.
code. And I'm sure it will on the C#
Bet
side.
your API is good too, because until you do that, especially if you're writing like a factory or a service or something in Angular,
Right.
you're not consuming it per se. You're just writing it, and then you realize, man, my API kind of sucks.
Right. Well, and that's
having the not having the test.
I'm going to jump in because I heard a lot of Pluralsight, and Wintellect has a
Oh
library
my gosh,
that
yes,
we're
I
building.
forgot about that.
Okay, so we're getting into on-demand training, and I think the unique proposition we're trying to bring to the table is in the trenches, lessons learned, scars from battles. And again, I mentioned this earlier, but a different approach that I take from what I see a lot of developers take is not just looking at the technology, but looking at the team, right? And so that's I've got a video called Enterprise JavaScript Development, and what it speaks to is not just looking at, hey, do I want this library or that library, but how do I look at the product and the team and then pull together the right tools and tool sets to create something that's not just about the user experience in the app, but also the maintainability, the way that developers can plug in, ramp up, how you can scale out your team, and do all of these things. And testing is a huge part of being able to do that. And frameworks like Angular make it so much easier to create the components
Lends itself
in a way
very
you can
well.
test it.
Real
I'm looking
quick,
forward to
guys.
seeing that.
All right, so to wrap up, 30 seconds each. John, final thoughts.
If any advice I give folks out there, I'd like to wrap things up with an action item they should take, and it'd be a good place to start is, if you want to get into Angular, where do you go? Where do you start? How do you look at this? And let's look at the tools, because there's lots of sites to go to. Dan's got a great video out there, which you can't count. I think he calls it 60-ish minutes, and it's 67 minutes.
Yeah, now we got a 20-ish.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's some great places to start there, but I would first say, before you actually get into Angular or this JavaScript spa type world, try to take the experience that you have and what you've been doing so far and translate it over, because it's not like you have to leave behind what you've done in Java, .NET, etc. to do that. The same concepts we've all had in those, we've taken over to Angular. So don't get your mind shift right first and then start looking at what Angular can offer and try to make those relations.
Yeah, I would echo something else that we said, is that don't try and bite it all off in one chew. This is really fun and easy to get into, and you can deliver value pretty quickly if you don't try and turn everything inside out.
Right. And I would just say, our whole transition to Angular in an app started out as a proof of concept. I get a lot of questions, should I use Angular for this? Should I use this for this? And only you can really answer that, but there's no reason why you have to make that all-in commitment, right? It can work to take a small piece, build a proof of concept to move forward, but don't just think about the tool set and does it do cool things in data binding. Think about how easy is it to learn, how much support out there is there, how does your team scale when building the app, and look at those experiences and use that to drive your decision.
So I'll wrap up because they kind of hit on things I totally agree with, the baby steps and all that, is the kind of the benefits, I think, for those that are looking at Angular. I think your app probably illustrates it the best. I haven't seen the app, but it sounds like it's top secret. But it's
Yeah,
big,
I can't
big,
show
big,
it to
big.
you.
But the
it's-
one we're
it's
envisioning
big.
as you talk about
Yeah,
it, it's
that
fantastic.
sounds
It's
awesome.
the coolest thing.
But is that it really can help if you've ever avoided JavaScript because you're doing a lot of server-side stuff like we've been talking about, and you didn't want to go to JavaScript because it just felt like this world of mess. Angular will make it so that your app is, if you do it right, is very modular, and from a maintenance standpoint, I think that's just huge. Anyone that's worked in production support, I mean, you guys all have, and it's just such a cool thing to know that if this piece breaks, oh, well, I just go here. Or if this piece breaks, I go here, versus I have this either massive JavaScript file or it's spread out across just these files that Jim over here, put together. I think is what Angular really, for me, brings to the table, is it adds this consistent, what do you call it, fabric you build
Yeah,
upon?
it's a fabric that you can plug your app into.
Yeah.
So it's not just for building to-do apps, which is the common thing we get a lot of.
Exactly.
Well, this is great for a to-do app, but you can't build anything of real size in an enterprise with it.
Oh,
That's
yes,
a
you
myth.
can.
You can absolutely
Absolutely.
do it.
So you can, you got some big ones. So, all right, well, thanks a lot, guys, and thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, it looks better.
there peacefully.
I'll tell you what, we can park him right in here. I'll put my hand up the back, and you can talk from him remotely. You know? Okay.
I can have it in there.
Oh boy.
I think he fell asleep. Hold on.
Oh, is there a hand up there? How do you
He's drunk.
How do you make?
Yeah,
Hit a tough night out. How do you make his head? How do you make
Trouble
his?
finding the
All right.
it's called
That's how it goes.
Grumpy Grandpa.
grumpy old man.
Grumpy old man.
Grumpy. Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, he's gonna start. He's gonna start like this.
Why doesn't he MC?
Yeah,
He can be the host.
Introduce yourselves. Who's gonna be the voice? Come on, John. See your best ventriloquist.
Okay, so we're here at ng-conf, and we've got Wahlin, Jeremy Likness.
I'm a little late.
Grumpy old man.
Yeah.
I didn't realize I was supposed to be you. Can we? God!
Poor Carl and John Papa. We've all come from a .NET/Silverlight background. They're all here at ng-conf. Guys, why are you here?
Because it was
This isn't a
fun.
Microsoft conference, this is an Angular conference. What brings you here?
Oh,
We'll go around the room. Go ahead.
they put the cloak over my head, and I ended up on an airplane, and I woke up here, and Dan took me out. But